Imagine this. You're in a tense meeting. Two people are arguing, voices rising, tempers flaring. They interrupt, accuse, defend, repeat. You sit quietly, observing. Philosophers clinging to systems, ideas, identities. He rejected them all. He chose solitude, silence, and inner strength over applause, over status. They may appear polished, but they're fragile. It's not conflict that breaks them, it's the lack of it. Without being tested, your beliefs are opinions. Without resistance, your mind is untouched. Sword, and untouched is unprepared. Look back. Galileo stood against the church, not to argue, but to challenge, to reshape the truth. His strength didn't lie in his words. It lay in his conviction to speak when it mattered most. The Übermensch walks this edge, speaking when necessary, holding silence like a blade, engaging not to win the moment, but to dominate the long game. Because power isn't about avoiding fire, it's about walking through it without burning. So the next time you're drawn into a conflict, pause, breathe, and ask, am I reacting, or am I ruling the moment? That pause might be the most powerful thing you ever say. Socrates died for asking the wrong questions to the right people. Nietzsche was laughed at until his words shaped generations. They weren't silent. They were selective. They didn't argue for ego. They argued to disrupt, reshape, and rebuild. There's a difference between debating for approval and confronting to transform. The Übermensch knows this. He doesn't waste time proving he's right. He shapes reality by forcing others to see differently. Think about it. Socrates didn't shout. He asked. He exposed contradiction not with aggression, but with calm, surgical questions. The kind that leave people questioning themselves days later. Over popularity, because he knew true power is lonely, not because it's isolating, but because very few can handle that kind of self-possession. Nietzsche, his words weren't meant to comfort, they were meant to unsettle, to crack your worldview, so you're forced to rebuild it stronger. And Steve Jobs, he didn't avoid conflict, he weaponized it. He challenged people, pushed them, made them uncomfortable, because comfort creates complacency. Discomfort, that's where innovation happens. Powerful people argue, yes, but not for likes, not for applause. They argue to elevate dent, to shift direction, to bend the world toward their vision. The Übermensch argues when there's purpose, when there's growth, when there's something at stake beyond pride. When should you engage? When the conflict sharpens your perspective. When it uncovers a truth worth fighting for. When it causes growth in you or them. When silence would mean surrendering power. And when should you walk away? When it's just about ego. When you know the other person can't hear anything past their own voice. When it's an emotional pit that pulls you in, but gives you nothing back. When your silence says more than 1,000 clever comebacks ever could. Unfocused conflict is a drain. Strategic conflict, that's leverage. Nietzsche wasn't anti-conflict, he was anti-waste. He believed in choosing the right battles and walking into them like a storm, not a sponge. If a fight weakens you, leave it. If a fight refines you, welcome it. If a fight distracts you, ignore it. If a fight builds you, master it. Because silence alone isn't power, precision is. Now imagine this, you wake up and you're told, you have only 100 words left. So what happens when you don't argue? When you stop needing to win? Something strange. People get confused, they get uncomfortable. For the rest of your life, every syllable now costs something. Would you waste your final sentences arguing with a stranger online? Would you burn through your last words, proving something to someone who never mattered? Or would you sharpen every word like a blade, speak only when it cuts through fog, when it shifts reality, when it demands to be heard? This is the essence of true power, discipline. Clarity, weight behind every sound, because words, they're currency. Spend too many, and they lose value. Use them sparingly, and they echo. Now picture yourself mid-argument. Your voice rises. Your hands move. Your chest tightens. Your mind rushes to win. But pause. Breathe. Ask who's really in control. The one spewing paragraphs, or the one who waits, calm, focused, silent, and speaks when it matters. That's not retreat. That's domination. That's not weakness. That's strategy. But then in that pause, in that calculated silence, you don't just hold power, you become it. The next time someone throws a verbal punch, don't swing back. Pause. Don't flinch. Just watch. Sure. Most people expose themselves the moment they start talking. They reveal their insecurities, their need for validation, their craving to be seen, and the more they speak, the more naked they become. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to explain your worth. Your silence does it for you. Real strength isn't loud. It's composed, measured, intentional. So here's your challenge. The next time you feel that fire to argue, that pull to prove, that itch to clap back, don't pause. Let the silence sit heavy. Let it make the other person uncomfortable. Let them wonder what you're thinking, because silence isn't absence. They push harder. Why? Because most people only know how to interact through resistance. When you don't push back, they lose their footing. It's presence. It's not you backing away. It's you standing so still that every eye turns to you. People underestimate silence. They think it means weakness. But only the weak feel the need to fill every gap with noise. The strong, they let the gaps speak for them. Look at any room. The one who listens more than he talks. The one who doesn't flinch at provocation. The one who waits until he chooses to speak. That is the one everyone watches. Silence makes people project. They start explaining themselves, even when no question was asked. They get nervous. They fill in blanks with their own fears. And that's the trick. That's the secret. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to withstand the urge to speak. Because most arguments, they're not about truth. They're about ego. They're about who can shout louder, interrupt faster, insult better. But power doesn't interrupt. Power waits. Power watches. Power knows exactly when to strike if it strikes at all. Words are tools. Used carelessly, they make noise. Used precisely, they reshape the room. So when you speak, speak like a sculptor, not like a hammer. Chisel. Don't smash. Cut, don't swing. And sometimes, the most powerful cut is made in total silence. People fear what they can't predict. And silence, it's unpredictable. It makes people lean in. It forces them to reveal themselves. Their need for reaction becomes a confession.
You watch.
They're forced to confront themselves, something many would rather avoid at all costs. And that, right there, is where the power lies. You learn, you wait, and when the moment finally comes, if it comes, you say exactly what needs to be said, not to win. Not to be right, but to shift the room, to create impact, to own the space, even if it's with just one sentence. Or maybe you say nothing, because even silence, at the right time, is a statement, a message, a rejection of chaos, a refusal to dance with petty energy. Remember, control isn't about silence alone. It's about choice. And every time you choose not to argue, you're saying, I won't play your game, I'm playing mine. So try it. Next time tension rises, don't reach for the perfect comeback. Don't race to respond. Pause. Breathe. Watch. They'll tell you everything you need to know, with their words, their tone, their desperation. And you'll sit there, calm, sharp, unshaken. That's power. That's presence. That's mastery. If this speaks to you, and you want more on mastering your mind, commanding your energy, and navigating life with precision, hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell. And remember, stay aware, stay deliberate, stay powerful. By not engaging, you create a mirror, and people either grow or break. Now this doesn't mean silence is always the answer. But the question is, are you reacting? Or are you choosing? Because reaction is slavery. Choice is freedom. Nietzsche wanted us to transcend the ordinary. Not through domination, but through mastery of the self, of emotion, of timing. To become someone who doesn't need to argue. Someone who has already won, simply by refusing to step into the ring. So next time someone tries to drag you into a fight, pause. Breathe. Look at them. Smile maybe. Say nothing. Watch the control shift instantly. That's not weakness. That's Nietzschean strength. And if you're still here, still listening, still thinking deeper than most people ever will, then maybe, just maybe, you've already taken your first step toward becoming one yourself. You have something to say. You could destroy their argument in seconds, but you don't. You simply watch, and suddenly, the energy shifts. Hit that subscribe button. We're only just beginning. Two people sit across from each other in a tense room. One is loud, voice sharp, words flying like arrows. The other, calm, quiet, listening. They barely speak, but when they do, the whole room shifts. The question is, who really holds the power? Nietzsche would tell you, It's the one who doesn't flinch. The one who doesn't get pulled into the emotional tug of war. The one who speaks last and speaks with purpose. Because real power, he believed, doesn't come from noise. It comes from control, from restraint, from silence. Yes, silence. Not the kind that's empty or fearful, but the kind that commands attention. The kind that forces the other person to fill the space, expose their motives, and question themselves. Strategic silence, when used right, becomes a weapon. It creates discomfort, and discomfort creates power, because people fear what they can't read, and nothing is harder to read than a calm, still mind in the middle of chaos. Nietzsche's Übermensch didn't yell to be heard. He didn't scramble to prove he was right. He observed, he calculated, he chose his words with surgical precision. Because silence isn't the absence of strength, it's the presence of mastery. Let's take a closer look. 3 legends, 3 completely different lives. 1. Unshakable truth. Silence, used wisely, always wins. Socrates, the quiet disarmer. He didn't fight with fists or shout others down. He asked questions, one after another, not to confuse but to reveal. Imagine a proud man claiming to know the truth. They both look at you, waiting, curious, a little nervous. Why? Because silence, when intentional, is power. Nietzsche understood something most people never will. The moment you have to prove yourself, you've already surrendered your authority. Socrates asks, "What is truth?" The man answers. Socrates asks, again and again, and suddenly the man isn't sure anymore. He's tripping over his own logic, unraveling from the inside, not because he was insulted, but because he was heard. Socrates didn't win arguments, he ended them, by letting others defeat themselves. Steve Jobs, the storm behind the stillness. Jobs wasn't quiet because he lacked ideas. He was quiet when it didn't matter. He reserved his fire for the moments that did. In the development of the iPhone, his team wanted compromises. Jobs listened, paused, and then said, "No, the button stays gone." It wasn't yelling, it was conviction. He wasn't reacting, he was setting the tone. His silence in meetings wasn't weakness, it was pressure. And pressure makes diamonds or exposes cracks. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated swordsman. He fought over 60 duels, never lost. But his most powerful technique wasn't his blade, it was his timing. Musashi would often arrive late to a duel, calm, unbothered. He'd say little, observe, and then end the fight in seconds. Why? Because he understood what Nietzsche meant by will to power. You don't win by reacting, you win by deciding when to act. Musashi didn't just master combat, he mastered the space between movements. He weaponized silence, turning patience into pressure. So here's the truth. Arguing might win you applause, but silence wins respect. True dominance isn't loud, it's quiet, poised, untouchable. The Übermensch, the superior individual in Nietzsche's philosophy, is not desperate to win petty fights. It creates space for truth to reveal itself without force. It disarms, confuses and controls, but only when it comes from strength. Only when it's a choice. So next time someone tries to bait you into chaos, don't take the bait. Pause. Watch. And speak only when it counts, because words spoken at the right moment are sharper than any sword. If that resonates with you, hit subscribe. There's a lot more power to unlock. Designers wanted buttons, physical, tactile, clicky. Jobs didn't argue. He didn't yell.
He simply waited.
And guided. He let his team vent, complain, resist. Then, step by step, he asked the right questions. He showed them prototypes. He let them feel the future, and by the end they believed it was their idea. Not because he forced them, but because he led them. That's the genius. Most people argue to be right. Jobs didn't care about being right. He cared about being effective, because if your words don't shift someone's perspective or inspire action, they're just noise. Let's take it off the stage of tech and into the realm of war. Meet Miyamoto Musashi, Japan's undefeated swordsman. 60 duels, 0 losses, but his sharpest weapon, silence. Musashi understood something most warriors never did. You don't win by fighting. You win by controlling the fight before it begins. One of his most famous duels was with Sasaki Kojiro, lightning fast, supremely skilled. He doesn't chase approval, he creates his own standards. The average person, arguing, is survival, a way to cling to identity. Everyone expected a flashy showdown, but Musashi showed up hours late. Kojiro stood there fuming, sword in hand, ego boiling. Musashi finally arrived, calm and distant. By the time the fight began, Kojiro's rage had taken over. He struck wildly, and Musashi ended it in moments. Musashi didn't just beat his opponents physically, he beat them mentally, because a furious enemy is an easy enemy, and a silent man in control of himself, he's terrifying. That's where Nietzsche comes back in. His idea of the Übermensch wasn't about muscle or shouting louder, it was about influence, inner control, mastery of reaction. The Übermensch doesn't engage in petty back and forths. He doesn't defend his ego. He shapes the battlefield, then watches others stumble into traps he laid in silence. What do Musashi, Jobs, and Socrates all have in common? They didn't waste energy on pointless battles. They didn't react, they strategized. Socrates questioned, Jobs guided, Musashi waited. They didn't yell to win. They whispered, and let the silence do the damage. So ask yourself this. The last time you argued, did you win, or did you just react? Did you control the outcome, or did someone control you? We think arguments are about truth. They're not. They're about control. Every time you raise your voice to prove a point, every time your heart races mid-debate, every time you need to be right, you're revealing something. You're not in control. You're being controlled. Nietzsche knew this. His will to power isn't brute force. It's refined restraint. It's the art of staying grounded while the world spins in chaos. And modern psychology backs him up. We argue not because we're confident, but because we feel threatened. Our ideas, our identity, our pride, it all feels under siege. To prove, over and over again, I matter. But the Übermensch doesn't need to prove it. He simply is both. So we lash out, but in doing so, we give the other person our power. True strength isn't loud, it's composed, strategic, focused. Silence isn't weakness, it's a test of who can stay centered when emotions rise. And those who pass it, they don't just win arguments, they win respect. So next time someone challenges you, pause, don't react, don't defend, just observe, because power doesn't need to scream. Sometimes, it only needs a stare, and one well-timed sentence that says, I'm not here to argue, I'm here to win there. Most arguments aren't about facts. They're about wounds, the meances, deep, emotional, often invisible wounds, triggered by a few words. Let's unravel this. 1. Cognitive biases. Your brain wants to win, not learn. We like to think we're rational. But your brain? It's built to protect your beliefs, not challenge them. Confirmation bias. You search for proof of what you already think. Backfire effect. The more someone argues, the more stubborn you become. Dunning-Kruger effect. The less you know, the more confident you are. It's not a debate, it's a performance, two people waiting for their turn to talk, not to learn, but to win. The Übermensch doesn't fall for this. He doesn't chase approval. He studies the room, measures the energy, and decides if speaking is even necessary. 2. Emotional triggers. Why it feels personal. Why do some arguments make you rage while others don't touch you? Because it's rarely about logic. It's about identity. This is the silent trick Nietzsche spoke of. When you argue to be right, you shrink yourself down to the size of that moment. Disagreeing with someone's political view, that's not just a discussion. That's attacking their tribe, their story, their self-worth. That's why arguments about religion, gender, values, they go nuclear fast. People aren't defending ideas, they're defending themselves. The truly powerful never get emotional in arguments, because when someone controls your emotion, they control you. The Übermensch watches. He lets the fire burn out, then walks through the ashes untouched. 3. The validation trap. Why? We really argue. Most people don't want truth. They want validation. They want likes, agreement, nods, applause. It's not about being right. It's about being seen as right. Nietzsche knew this. He saw it clearly. Most people live to be accepted by the crowd. But the Übermensch, he creates his own truth. He doesn't beg to be understood. He simply is. He doesn't chase the crowd. He watches it from the mountain. Think of the greats: Einstein, Da Vinci, Mandela. Did they argue with every critic? No. They stayed focused. They built. They let results scream louder than opinions ever could. Now let's talk science. Modern psychology backs it all up. 1. Power dynamics. In conversations, psychologists found something fascinating. The most powerful people in a room aren't the loudest. They're the ones who control the rhythm. They don't interrupt. They don't override. They don't over-explain. They drop words like stones, heavy, precise, and everyone listens. Not because of volume, but because of presence. Power isn't noise, it's weight. Too calm is king. The science of self-restraint behavioral research proves it. The calmer you are in an argument, the more persuasive you become. But when you choose not to engage, when you let the chaos swirl around you and remain unbothered, you become larger than the moment itself. Because we instinctively link calmness to competence. A person in control of themselves must know what they're doing. It's biology. It's ancient wiring. Nietzsche predicted this. He believed real power wasn't about domination. It was about self-mastery. The man who cannot be provoked, he's dangerous. Because he's free from triggers, free from needing approval, free from reacting like everyone else. He's not in the crowd. He's above it. So next time you're pulled into an argument, pause. Ask yourself, am I proving something or losing myself? Am I reacting or choosing? Because power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from not needing to shout at all. Power begins where reaction ends. The Übermensch does not flinch. He does not defend. He decides, and that makes him untouchable. Nietzsche didn't glorify silence to escape conflict. He elevated it as the ultimate sign of strength. Because when you control your reaction, you control the entire room. Let's make it simple. If someone insults you and you snap back, you've already lost. If someone provokes you, and you feel the need to prove yourself, you've surrendered the frame. If you argue just to feel heard, you're feeding your ego, not your purpose. But if you stay centered, if you observe, if you respond only when it moves the needle, you've already won. Nietzsche's point wasn't say nothing, it was say only what matters. Speak when you choose, not when your emotions beg you to. Power is restraint. And Nietzsche didn't just say this, he lived it. He watched the intellectual world tear itself apart with debates. Ask yourself, is this my choice or my reaction? Is this response helping my purpose, or stroking my pride? Am I the master of this moment, or just another voice in the noise? Because real power is not in more words. It's in the space before the words, that pause, that breath everyone waits for. That's where influence begins. Silence is a weapon, but it's not the only one. Does this mean you should never speak? No. Silence without intention is just avoidance, and avoidance isn't wisdom, it's fear. If silence was the only answer, Socrates would have never questioned. Mandela would have never resisted. Revolutionaries would have never risen. They spoke because they had to. Power is not in silence alone. It's in control. Tone, all, timing. Tone, all, tone. Nietzsche's will to power was never about hiding. It was about rising. He wasn't preaching detachment. He was pushing for transformation. The Übermensch doesn't argue about crumbs, but he doesn't run from war. He understands. Conflict is a tool. It sharpens you. It breaks what's weak and leaves behind only what's strong. Most people fear confrontation. Why? Because it makes them uncomfortable. But Nietzsche knew discomfort is the seed of strength. Growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from collision. Weak minds avoid pressure. Strong minds welcome it because they know a dull blade never cut history. The crucible of conflict. Imagine a warrior who never enters the arena, a sword that never meets resistance, a philosophy that's never questioned,